Episodes 7, 8, and 9 of Better Call Saul Season 6, in my opinion, form a trilogy of masterful and highly emotional storytelling. I dare say these episodes, a nearly 3-hour-long narrative, are some of the best that television has to offer as a serious art form. These 3 episodes tend to mix their genres, which really places us as viewers even more on edge and emotionally impacted. Plan and execution primarily utilizes a comedic plot structure, with its shocking ending leading into the horror plot structure of point and shoot, which then leads us into the tragic plot structure of fun and games, capping off the prequel timeline and fully being in the circumstances of Breaking Bad. Today we'll finish exploring each episode's respective plot structure, and how both the adherence to and violation of these structures connect each episode narratively and thematically, and how the trilogy as a whole connects to the overarching tragic transformation of Jimmy McGill that we all knew was going to come, but we didn't expect to get there in this exact way. I've been doing this video essay in parts to make the analysis more digestible and easier to follow, but I will compile all the parts together in a supercut. Last week we covered the overcoming the monster plot structure of point and shoot. Now we'll complete this series by exploring the tragedy plot structure of Season 6, Episode 9, Fun and Games, what I would call Better Call Saul's darkest episode, especially because of the preceding dark comedy of Episode 7 and the preceding horror of Episode 8. This is the comedy, horror, and tragedy of Better Call Saul's final episodes. The final episodes in the prequel timeline, to be exact. If it's your first time here, my name is Quentin. I'm a writer, a teacher, and sometimes performer. It's time yet again to analyze the complex characters and precise artistry of this series. I'm assuming if you clicked on this video essay, then you're familiar with the premise of the show, so I don't really need to summarize anything. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. So let's get into today's analysis, the tragedy of Better Call Saul's fun and games. We'll be using Christopher Booker's text, The 7 Basic Plots, as a guide for this analysis. I already explained in the first parts about the 7 basic plot structures we tend to utilize when telling stories, at least in Western culture. But as a quick reminder, a plot structure is the series of progressive points a narrative fulfills to tell a clear and satisfying story, typically ending with the protagonist having changed in some way from their experiences. Now, where it gets interesting is when narratives violate basic plot structures, primarily by combining different genres into one singular narrative and thereby mixing different plot beats, keeping the audience engaged and uncertain. And this is exactly what these 3 episodes in Better Call Saul accomplish. So let's look at the tragedy plot structure of Season 6, Episode 9, Fun and Games. Not to be too much of a downer, but I think it's safe to say that all of us have experienced a personal or collective tragedy before. Remember that pandemic we just had? Or we've all at least witnessed someone go through a tragedy. According to Christopher Booker, comedy and tragedy are the most recognizable plot structures out of the major 7, probably because universally, we all laugh and we all cry. Generally, tragic stories involve the downfall or destruction of a protagonist or a group of characters, often resulting in death, whether a literal death or a metaphorical death due to circumstances, mistakes, or individual flaws. While Breaking Bad most certainly has tragic elements throughout, it's more of a fast-paced crime drama, whereas Better Call Saul is a character-driven tragedy with crime drama and comedic elements all throughout. The tragedy of Jimmy McGill's transformation into Saul Goodman is complete by this final episode in the prequel timeline, along with tragic transformations for our other characters as well, like Kim, Mike, and Gus. Fun and Games is the tragic climax of not only the series as a whole, but of course the 3-episode trilogy we've been exploring, with the Gene Takovic episodes serving as a denouement for both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. We'll come back to the narrative/thematic connections between these 3 episodes and Jimmy's overall transformation into Saul Goodman. Now let's get into the typical stages of a tragic plot, as outlined by Christopher Booker. Many of them are actually the same in structure to overcoming the monster, but with very different circumstances. First, we have the anticipation stage. Quote, "The tragic hero gets it into his or her head that something is missing, and they want it. This might be power, fame, a specific love interest, or something else, but the protagonist has their motivation for the disaster dominoes that are about to fall. We call that object of desire a MacGuffin," end quote. MacGuffin being a Hitchcockian term, meaning something that motivates the characters, but doesn't carry a lot of relevance to the overall plot in general. Dream stage. Quote, the tragic hero sets out on their path to obtain their MacGuffin. Something occurs that tells the reader, or the viewer, that this is a no turning back situation, and things start to go strangely well for the protagonist. He or she might well be on their way down the path of evil, but no one is calling them out on it, or no one can stop them, so they proceed further into the depths. End quote. Frustration stage. Quote, right about here is where the tragic hero hits their first roadblocks. They might be small annoyances, but in dealing with them, the protagonist commits additional dark acts that seal their fate and alerts the reader or viewer that the only way this can end is badly. End quote. Nightmare stage. Quote, the tragic hero's plan is unraveling, and they can sense that an opposing force or fate is closing in. He or she is increasingly paranoid and living in fear of what's to come. End quote. Destruction or death stage. Quote, our protagonist breathes their last breath, whether at the hands of their enemies or due to some final act of violence. Either way, their death isn't mourned much, and the darkness that surrounded them dissipates, and there is much rejoicing. End quote. Similar to the overcoming the monster structure of point and shoot, the first few points in the tragedy plot structure are already established in previous episodes in Season 6, well before the events of Fun and Games. Though like point and shoot and its structure, Fun and Games is the epitome and total fulfillment of the tragedy structure, where everything established throughout the season and throughout the prequel timeline meets a tragic end. So let's look at Season 6, Episode 9 through the tragedy plot structure. I will make some reference to Mike and Gus's tragic circumstances in this analysis, since they have their own equally compelling arcs prior to the Breaking Bad timeline, but the central focus of the series, and these 3 episodes, have always been on Jimmy McGill's transformation into Saul Goodman. We begin this analysis with the anticipation stage. In Season 5, Episode 10, Something Unforgivable, knowing that Jimmy is still unsettled by Lalo confronting him at Kim's apartment, and sensing their relationship is on thin ice, Kim proposes an elaborate scam against Howard Hamlin, a character they both have a complicated history with, and someone who could be useful as a pawn to make the Sandpiper Crossing case settle quicker. With the fact that their connection stems from the love of the con, Kim therefore sees this character assassination plot primarily as a way to reconnect, though they tell themselves they're doing it for a greater good, forcing an early settlement for their benefit and the benefit of the Sandpiper Crossing residents. This is their MacGuffin, to reconnect romantically and distract themselves through the fun and games of an elaborate scam. In a really messed up way, their overarching desire is to stay together, even if it means Howard's reputation gets ruined. In episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, Jimmy and Kim are truly in the dream stage. Every single step in their con is going according to plan. Cliff sees fake drugs fall out of Howard's locker in Wine and Roses. Jimmy manipulates the Kettlemans into accusing Howard of being on drugs to Cliff in Carrot and Stick. Huel and another accomplice make a copy of Howard's car key in Rock and Hard Place, and Cliff witnesses Jimmy, dressed as Howard, throw a sex worker out of his car in Hit and Run. Even Howard is reacting the way they planned, hiring a fake private investigator to follow Jimmy in episode 5, Black and Blue. Everything is going crazily well, even when Jimmy has to use all of his strength to move a parking sign outside Howard's therapist's office, or when Huel starts questioning the necessity for this elaborate scam. We reach the frustration stage by episode 4, when Mike reveals to Kim that Lalo Salamanca is still alive, and thus Jimmy and her are being watched by Gus Fring's men, just in case Lalo makes contact. Kim knows that if Jimmy finds out, he'll want to stop the scam, so she keeps it from him in order to keep pursuing their MacGuffin, reconnecting by scamming together, a reasoning she reveals in Fun and Games. Later frustration occurs when Kim is presented with the option of stopping the final play of the scam due to Casimiro's broken arm and continuing on to Santa Fe, for a meeting that could bring her legal dreams to life in episode 6, Axe and Grind. But of course, she chooses the Howard scam, a bad choice that will seal the fates of herself, Jimmy, and Howard. And this is where the comedy structure of plan and execution kicks in, although as we know, it doesn't complete its final point. Instead, we're placed in the overcoming the monster structure with the horror of point and shoot. It's really interesting how we go in and out of different plot structures simultaneously throughout the season. The impending tragedy of Jimmy and Kim's scam with some dark comedic plot points combined with the impending horror of Lalo Salamanca. 3 different structures operating at the same time, and each one reaching their peak within this trilogy of episodes. Reaching the nightmare stage in the tragedy structure, Jimmy and Kim fulfill their scam by episode 7, and Lalo is defeated by episode 8. But the murder of Howard is an unexpected consequence that they now have to deal with. And this, I believe, is the tragic stage where episode 9 begins. Our opening montage, set to a cover of Perfect Day, originally by Harry Nielsen, is beautifully done, but incredibly haunting and tragic. It almost brings me to tears every time I see it. The contrast between Jimmy and Kim going about their days as if they aren't indirectly responsible for someone's death because of their immoral desires, while Mike and the rest of the crew cover up this death, is a nightmare to say the very least. As humans living in this modern age, I'm sure we've all had the experience of having something troubling on our minds while being forced to behave like a functional person in the world. On a personal note, I even had a bit of trouble completing this final script because I'm a bit distracted by some stressful things going on in my life, though nothing on the same level of what Jimmy and Kim are thinking about during this quote-unquote perfect day. Another detail to note if we look at color theory is that Jimmy and Kim both wear blue, a color associated with the legal world as well as ideals of safety and stability. I think this presents a bit of a double meaning. They're trying to blend into the legal surroundings in spite of their criminal actions, and they're about to be safe and stable because of the cover-up being orchestrated. Physically safe and stable, that is. They are both very far from being emotionally safe and stable. The final lyric and shot compositions as they come back to their apartment very much reflect back on their MacGuffin, quote, "to say I love you," end quote. They did this scam primarily because that's how they romantically connect. They never say I love you throughout the series, but rather express their love through mutual love of an activity rather than through words. But now, there's no doubt they both have blood on their hands. It's even worse for Kim, since she chose to withhold vital information about Lalo from Jimmy. Jimmy, in his avoidant way, can do some minor mental gymnastics to rationalize that it was Lalo who killed Howard. How could they have known he was still alive and would show up like that? Lalo's murder of Howard as an opposing force to their plans has planted them back into the tragic circumstances they've been heading towards, being forced to double down on Howard being an unstable drug-addicted lawyer in order to protect themselves from the wrath of the cartel. Kim and Jimmy have to lie straight to Cheryl Hamlin's face. The guilt of knowing full well what really happened and being indirectly responsible for it is truly a living nightmare, one which Kim, more than Jimmy, would like to escape from, as epitomized by this tender, sad kiss directly under an electric light source. Electric lights being placed near Jimmy throughout the show to represent his morally flexible attitude towards the law. Kim, having morally declined slower than Jimmy has now experienced what her moral flexibility can result in, the undeserved death of another human being. And now we come to the final stage in a tragedy. Destruction or death. Not only have we reached the metaphorical death of Jimmy and Kim as a couple and as individuals, but Gus and Mike are somewhat dead inside after everything. It's tragic for Mike as he realizes after talking to Manuel Varga about Nacho that he's just as bad as the people he works for. Despite his attempts to maintain some moral code and justice in the face of criminal activity, Mike has failed. Mike is down in the gutter with the rest of these gangsters. Gus, despite getting a chance to relax a bit and let his guard down, realizes he can never have a normal life, as demonstrated by abruptly leaving his flirtatious interaction with a man at the bar. Now, you could interpret this moment either as Gus realizing this, or him sadly being unable to get his revenge on the Salamancas out of his mind, even for one night. I personally interpret it as the former, but no matter how you interpret it, this is another tragic moment in a very tragic episode. Then we reach the metaphorical deaths of Jimmy and Kim. Resigning as a lawyer and ready to face the reality that her and Jimmy are, in her words, poisoned together, Kim ends their relationship once and for all. It's the first time we ever hear them say,
"I love you. I love you too."
But for Kim, it doesn't matter. As she says, other people suffer because of them. Jimmy, trying to stop the destruction of their relationship, rationalizes again how Lalo was the one who killed Howard. But Kim puts that to rest by revealing she knew Lalo was still out there, but was having too much fun reconnecting with Jimmy to tell the truth. Jimmy would not only not have taken it well, but he would have stopped the Howard scam from continuing, and then they would have ended their relationship. Their plan was successful, but it resulted in unintended tragedy. Kim's life as a lawyer in Albuquerque is dead, and so is Jimmy. The camera closing in on his back not only to visualize Kim turning her back on him, but Jimmy turning his back on whatever semblance was left of himself. Then we cut to Saul Goodman's morning routine. In a way, we come full circle in this trilogy of 7, 8, and 9. This scene has some signature Saul Goodman humor, straight out of Breaking Bad, but the context is tragic, thus we find ourselves again as we did in the beginning, in a dark comedy. Saul's trademark snappy and jester-like demeanor now has a darker edge, knowing the events that gradually created everyone's favorite criminal lawyer. But still, the prevailing feeling and structure of this entire episode is tragedy with a capital T. Jimmy McGill, as we have known him, is dead. Now, we better call Saul. So how are the structures of these episodes connected narratively and thematically to each other, and to the transformation of Jimmy McGill into Saul Goodman? I've touched on it a bit already, but let's summarize it completely. For starters, each episode's opening teaser hints at the incoming plot structure of the next episode. Lalo spying on the laundromat in the opening of episode 7 hints at the horror in episode 8. Howard's car settled on the beach in the opening of episode 8 hints at the final tragedy in episode 9. And the opening montage to episode 9 is just straight up haunting tragedy. It's clear how the dark comedy of the final play of the Howard scam transitions into the horror of Mike and Gus trying to overcome Lalo, which finally ends with the tragic results of the scam and seeing how it was the final catalyst in Jimmy embodying Saul Goodman. You can see how all of the plot structures in this trilogy are interconnected narratively through their adherence to long-established narrative structures, with each structure hinting at the other in their openings and leading into each other organically, with crucial plot stages even established in earlier episodes. Yet two of them never reach their final structural point. Jimmy and Kim never further their union as you typically see in comedic narratives, and Lalo's defeat is never truly celebrated, but rather covered up, unlike in typical overcoming the monster narratives. The only plot structure within this trilogy that reaches its final point is the tragedy plot structure. Jimmy McGill is dead, while Saul Goodman lives. So while the adherence to these structures kept this trilogy narratively together and narratively coherent, the violation of these plot structures, never reaching the final endpoints in comedy nor in horror, but reaching the final endpoint in tragedy, connect them thematically. One of the central themes of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul being that actions can have unintended consequences. And this most certainly applies to this trilogy. Jimmy and Kim's dark comedic union wouldn't have been interrupted by the horror of Lalo, and Howard wouldn't have been tragically killed if different actions had been taken on both sides. We never get to celebrate Jimmy and Kim reconnecting, nor breathe a sigh of relief that Lalo is dead, but we do see Jimmy go full Saul, which was always on the horizon in this series. Tragedy is the only completed plot structure because we've always been watching a tragic story unfold. Yet throughout 63 episodes, there were many moments of comedy, moments of disturbing drama bordering on psychological horror, and of course moments of tragedy. As I said in the first part of this video essay, in my opinion, Better Call Saul excelled at making us forget we were always heading towards a tragic transformation. I remember watching the first season and thinking, wow, this show is way more lighthearted than Breaking Bad. And then I was aghast at the revelation that Jimmy's own brother was working against him, and suddenly I thought I knew where the series would lead, but I was never totally right with my predictions. Better Call Saul was always leading to the tragedy of a protagonist searching for love and self-acceptance, only to find it in the wrong moral places. The narrative mixing in this trilogy and the series in general often kept us engaged and distracted from what was coming. We thought watching Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad become Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad would be all fun and games.
Because I was having too much fun!
But it was more than we bargained for, and that was the comedy, horror, and tragedy of Better Call Saul. Thank you so much for watching. My Patreon is linked below if you want to support me in making these videos, and get some perks. Or hey, why not throw me a tip by clicking on the 3 dots below? Or become a member of the channel. You can earn some badges and get early access to videos like this one. Any amount you can afford helps a lot. Thank you. A special shout out to our newest channel member, Beatrice Paz. Great to have you, and thanks for the support. Also, let's not forget Vermilion Star, our very first channel member. Thank you once again. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. See you soon.